we're obviously experiencing an opioid epidemic in Suffolk County. We're talking about several hundred opioid-related deaths over the last several years. On top of that, we're seeing an increase in Narcan saves, the drug that reverses an overdose from opioids. So we're in the midst of an epidemic, and we need to fight this on all fronts: prevention, treatment, and law enforcement. We need to do everything we can on all those fronts, but prevention is key. If we can save a family from ever having to go through the emotional and financial turmoil of addiction, that's the real win. And the way we double down on prevention is education. The more awareness there is about the drug problem and the perils of drug abuse and addiction and how to identify drug use and substance abuse early on, the better we'll be off. And that's why coalitions like the COMAC Coalition is so important, and all the coalitions throughout Suffolk County. So I want to thank Debbie Berger for all her work that she does in this community. What I ask all of you to do tonight is listen carefully, absorb all the information, talk about what you learned tonight with your family, and then spread the message. Because we can multiply the message by spreading it. So be a messenger. Learn something tonight, talk to your family about it, then talk to a friend. Talk to a colleague, and tell them about what you learned, and urge them to talk to their children. The more we talk about an issue, the better off we'll be. The police department is going to do everything we can to put a dent in this epidemic. We're going to go after the drug dealers. We're going to put pressure on the people who are spreading poison throughout our communities. But we're not going to arrest ourselves out of this epidemic. And we need people like Debbie, and we need people like the people in the COMAC School District to fight against this. And prevention and awareness is key. So I want to thank everyone, and again, spread the message. Thank you very much.
I've been on the police department I'm in my 25th year. I've been assigned to Community Response Bureau for the last little more over a year. One of the first things I did when I was assigned to that unit was I sat down with the community liaison officers. We have 7, one assigned to each precinct. And I asked each of them what the specific problems in their precinct were. And overall, the number one issue was the heroin abuse that's going on throughout the county.
When we first started this program, like my sergeant had just explained, it was a direct result of sitting down with other people such as myself that work in the community and trying to formulate some sort of plan to combat heroin and prescription drug abuse. And when we were sitting down and we were discussing it, we realized that we had a bit of a stigma to deal with. And I think most people here can agree. When we first started talking about this, the issue was, well, yeah, I've heard about it, and my friend's cousin, and I think my ex-boyfriend might have had a friend that dabbled in it, but it's not my kid. It's not on my block. I live in a nice neighborhood. Well, I disagreed with that. And the reason why is because it's all of our kids. Because the kids may not be overdosing and dying in high school, but they're experimenting with things that can lead to bigger and badder drug problems. Additionally, most of us here are lucky enough to own a nice vehicle, perhaps 2, own a nice home. Even if we rent, probably a very nice apartment, right? We expect that our home is our castle. And there's that invisible force field that we expect when we turn onto the driveway, which means we don't expect to get our cars rifled through in the middle of the night. We don't want to come home to a burglary that happened while we were at work. We work hard for our things, we've earned them. Well, I can guarantee you that your petty thefts, even your grand larcenies, as well as your burglaries, most of the time are motivated by a habit. And we have to stop with the stigma of that it's the bad kid, or it's the bad person, or well, there's no worries. I mean, my kids are good and my family's good. We raised them right. We don't have that type of family. We don't live in that type of neighborhood. Well, guess what? Anybody who's struggled or seen a family member struggle, addiction knows no bounds. Happens in every neighborhood. It's not a Suffolk County problem. It's not a Long Island problem. It's not a New York State problem. This is a nationwide and international problem. So we're going to discuss a little bit more about what heroin is, what it looks like, signs and symptoms of use, Note that it is made from morphine. Keep that in mind when we're discussing prescription drugs. Your narcotic pain medications are a derivative of the poppy plant. Poppy plant is very popular. You'll see it in big box stores for designs, anything from tablecloths to napkins or pictures on the wall. It's a very popular plant. It's a very pretty plant. This is what we run into a problem with here in the police department a lot. A lot of times, people that are on heroin or abusing heroin is not because they woke up one day and said, you know what, I'm gonna put a needle in my arm and I'm gonna try this heroin stuff. I hear it's pretty good. It's not how it happens. More often than not, it happens because they are, whether it was prescribed to them or they experimented with narcotic pain medication. And as we've seen in the previous slide, there's a connection there, yes? Right? Okay, so it makes sense. Now, what happens is, heroin is a cheaper way to get the same results, the same side effects that an addict wants. So, if they're using oxycodone or they're using Percocet or any of those things, after a while, because of legislation, there's something called the ISTOP law, which doesn't allow people to doctor shop anymore. Years ago, people with a habit, they would go to Dr. A, B, and C. They would explain a myriad of medical issues. I have pain, I hurt my back, things that were tough to prove. They go to the dentist. I can't afford to pull my tooth because I don't have insurance, but I really could use some pain medication. And they would then fill those prescriptions at CVS, Walgreens, Target, Walmart. And all of those different companies weren't speaking to one another. And these people would doctor shop. That's what the term is. And then all of a sudden we saw what was happening to our nation, and then we put the kibosh on that. So just like high school economics, supply and demand, what do you think happened? The demand was high for prescription pain pills that were not necessarily prescribed to you. And because your doctor would eventually wean you off, depending on your pain, legitimate or not, to a non-narcotic pain medication, the price for these, the street value of these, became increasingly higher. So this is what heroin looks like. More typically on the East Coast, we call it East Coast heroin, is the white powdery substance. It's sometimes yellow, and depending on how much it is cut or processed down, depends on how granular it may be. The colors vary. There's no quality control in drug making. So everything may be different. What you get today might not be what you get tomorrow. On the bottom right is considered, the street name is black tar heroin. Black tar heroin gets its name because it looks like small pieces of asphalt. That type of heroin in that packaging is more common on the West Coast. That's not to say that you don't see it here, but occasionally you will see it here. But more common is the white, yellow, granular stuff that you see on the other three pictures. These are common slang terms for heroin. The most common is H, horse, smack, brown sugar. Those are the ones that are more commonly used. But you have to remember, the thing with slang terms is it changes. And anybody can make a slang term for anything else. So a bunch of kids that might be using, and I keep saying kids, but obviously anybody that's using, and like my sergeant says with texting, they can give it a random name, just so you don't know what they're talking about. And the reasons why the name change is to avoid detection by the police and by you, the parental police. There's a heroin problem, I'm looking for the bent spoon and the lighter. I would know. I'd find a bent spoon or a lighter hanging around, or maybe a needle. That's not necessarily the case. Heroin can be ingested into the body 4 different ways, and you don't necessarily need a needle or a lighter for all of them. So the water bottle and cap, just like this, typical water bottle. If you find a ton of water bottles in somebody's car or in their room, especially if the water bottle cap is separate from the bottle, that's a clue. The reason why is heroin is highly soluble in water. And because it's soluble in water, they need the tiniest amount of liquid. And the bottle cap, when removed and a little bit of water put in, is a perfect receptacle for them to put a little bit of heroin in. This is if they're going to shoot it up, by the way. A little bit of heroin in. They use the plunger end of the syringe they stir it around, then they might use a piece of cotton balls, or the inside of a cigarette filter, and place that in the cap. It fits perfect. They would then put the needle in the cotton piece. Sometimes they don't, sometimes they do. That acts as a coffee filter, if you will, or a sieve, and it draws out the impurities. And they draw up the solution into the needle when they want to shoot heroin. By the way, heroin doesn't need to be heated, but sometimes people do choose to heat it to burn off the impurities. And also it adds, I am told, it adds to a euphoric effect when it's injected either intramuscularly or intravenously. Small pieces of aluminum foil, the heroin can be placed on top of the aluminum foil, and they can light underneath, and they can either use it to snort and waft up the vapor up, or they can use a glass pipe. Syringes and syringe caps, obviously, for injecting it. Small pieces of wax paper and glassine envelopes. We'll get to some visuals after this. That's how it's packaged. Dime bags, also how it's packaged. Lighters and candles used to heat the heroin, like we mentioned. Small rubber bands, those are used to band together the packaging, and we'll see pictures of that as well. And anything can be used as a tourniquet material. And the tourniquet is used on the arm, typically, and that's used to give yourself a better shot at your vein. So we see the middle section on the right, we see the bottle caps, self-explanatory. Below that, we see envelopes. Then on the bottom, we see the cigarette filters. There's a single one, and then for those of you in the back, if you can't see, there's just a bunch of them kind of bunched together. Then there's that bent spoon with the syringe. Above that, that's a glass pipe and the tin foil. In the middle is a spoon and a votive candle and a syringe. Top right, you're looking at syringes, the plunger end as well. You're gonna see there's a red and blue bottle cap up there. There's some plastic baggies, some cotton balls, a straw. The top in the middle, that is the little wax folds. And you'll notice it says Twilight on there. So a little bit about that. That is called the brand. So just like you have maybe a preference of a name brand product, I always give the example of macaroni and cheese. Some people are the Annie's Organic group, the least processed macaroni and cheese. Then there's the Kraft group. Don't mess with my mac and cheese, right? And you know by looking at that label, you know what that product's gonna taste like, how it affects you, right? And you pretty much know the cost, so you like that. So now, if you are an addict, you have your preference to brands. Now, brands are a way of a dealer putting his or her stamp on his product. Like, I got the good stuff, Twilight. A lot of them are whatever's popular. Whatever's popular in social media. Obviously, the Twilight movies were very popular for a while with the younger set. They market it like that for a reason. They want to draw you in. They want to make it seem harmless. Most people inject it. A lot of younger people, or people that are not first introduced to heroin, they're told, well, you can't get addicted unless you inject it. So they might try ingesting it a little bit, and as you can see, the effects take longer to take place, and you have to use more of it. And like anything else, when you first start using, you only need this much. But then you need this much, and then this much, and then this much. And each method of use only gets them to a certain point, and then they want more, and they want more. It's like it's on a way higher scale, but like what they say with cigarettes, like you're chasing like your first feeling of having a cigarette. You're never gonna get that. Same thing with heroin. You're never gonna, it's gonna build and build and build. You're gonna need more and more and more. And it's addictive no matter how it gets into the body. Take a look at the skin of the girl on the right with the striped shirt. In advanced stages of addiction, the hooded eyelids, the dark under eye circles. Somebody who's addicted and using heroin regularly, it is not uncommon for them to lose about 25 pounds a year. Their appetite diminishes greatly. They rely on the drug. You'll notice the guy on the bottom, he's injecting in between his toes. Common injection sites are on the inside of the elbows, in the crook of the elbow, just below, just like when you get your blood taken from the doctor's office. But they can inject anywhere. Remember, you can inject both intravenously and intramuscularly. The high is better and quicker in the vein. But if it's the summertime and I want to wear short sleeves and I don't want my parents or the police to see all these needle marks, these track marks, I'm going to inject it in between the toes. People inject it in the neck. They inject it under the tongue. They'll inject it anywhere they can. And the scariest picture in the slide is the top right. That girl is injecting that boy's neck at the jugular vein. The reason why that's scary is when people are in group settings, they start sharing needles. Your average 20-year-old, your average 15-year-old does not remember the AIDS epidemic. But when all the needles look the same, it's real easy to confuse them. And I'm sure in a couple of years, we're going to be seeing the increase in HIV and AIDS. So this is an example of track marks. You'll see the example on the bottom with the foot. Another thing, keep an eye out. Neosporin, Scar Cream, hydroquinone, which is a lightening cream. It's a beauty product that's used for people that have sun damage. The reason why they're doing that is they don't want detection. And oftentimes people tend to inject in the same spots. And when they're injecting in the same spots, those spots tend to get infected and scar, and they're looking to make that go away or be less noticeable. So again, these are the physical signs. You see the sallow complexion, dry mouth, flushed skin, constricted pupils, nodding off, weight loss, itching, nausea, vomiting, constipation. Hallmarks of a user. The big ones, constipation. It's kind of odd that I'm standing up here telling you that, but if you're living with somebody with an addiction like that, they tend to wake up in the morning out of sorts and spend a long time in the bathroom because they are constipated. They also will start the day off possibly looking for drugs. Early morning hours, they tend to be night owls. And when they do inject or they do use, one of the more noticeable signs and symptoms of use is the dope nod. If you want to see examples of this, YouTube search when you're bored. But basically the dope nod happens immediately after they're injecting. The feeling of euphoria is coursing through their body. And then what they do is they have that slow nod. It's a lot different than somebody that's falling asleep at a presentation such as this, that's trying to stay awake. And the difference is a lot more noticeable because they kind of look like they have no control of their head. So they kind of lower and raise their head in this manner. Anybody in the 80s or early 90s that took mass transit in New York City knows what this looks like. But this is the dope nod, and that is definitely a hallmark of narcotics, heroin specifically. The itching is because use activates the histamine response in the body. So typically they'll have scratch marks on their arms and their face. But there's things you can do to help. Number one thing, in your family, communicate. Talk to your family members. Check in with them. If you see somebody is not acting right, you see any of these symptoms, you see something going on, ask, talk. Some people want help. Some people don't at first, and some people that want help. You want to talk to them. Utilize the resources available to you. We have a ton of resource tables outside. There's many, many more. They can help you with everything from insurance questions to where do I go? You know, a lot of times people, they find out that they're dealing with addiction, and the first thing they do is they call a family priest or a rabbi. They just don't know where to go. These are the people that can definitely be able to help you out.
My name is Joe Saladino. I'm a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner and a volunteer firefighter. I'm going to be talking with you about opioid overdoses and presenting a demonstration on how to administer the drug naloxone, commonly known as Narcan, which treats opioid overdoses. This is for demonstration purposes only. To be fully qualified to administer this medication, please contact the New York State Department of Health in order to obtain sites and dates and times for full training. Let's begin by talking a little bit about what happens when you come across somebody who is not responsive. Again, when you come across someone who is not responsive, you follow the appropriate techniques from the American Heart Association. Shake the person, see if they respond. If they don't respond, take your fist, grind it into the person's chest. If the person is not responding, evaluate if they are breathing. Okay, if they are not breathing, immediately call 911 and ask for help. Explain that somebody is not breathing. Then evaluate the person for a pulse. If they do not have a pulse, follow BLS standards. If they have a pulse, but their breathing is either very shallow or not breathing at all, the first thing to do is to try to make sure that the airway is open. Tilt the head back, open the airway, and again, look for the signs of the chest expanding, listen and feel for breathing. If there is no breathing, the person may be experiencing an opioid overdose. Opioid overdoses can be the result of an overdose from many different things, including heroin, as well as prescription medications such as oxycodone, Vicodin, or Percocet. What all opioids do is they repress the ability of the body to breathe by blocking the receptors in the brain that trigger the body to breathe. In an effort to overcome their lack of breathing, which can lead to respiratory depression and ultimately death, there is a medication called naloxone, commonly known as Narcan. When administered properly, that will move the opioid medications off the receptors and allow the person to begin breathing again. Naloxone or Narcan is commonly found in packages that look like this. Again, you can obtain this through training from the New York State Department of Health. Okay. In the package, you will find a number of items. The items will come in a box that looks like this. When you open the box, you will find a syringe with a yellow tip on the front and a cap on the back. You will find a vial of Narcan. Typically, it has 2 milliliters, all right, with 2 milligrams of Narcan in it, 1 milligram per milliliter. And the final part of the package, you will find what's called an atomizer. So the first step are putting all three of these parts together. So you would take the atomizer out of the plastic bag. The atomizer looks like this, okay? The white tip is what will be inserted into the nostril. Then take the syringe. Gently pull off the yellow cap off the front of the syringe. Then pull off the yellow cap off the back of the syringe. Take the Narcan vial. Again, it's 2 milliliters, 2 milligrams, 1 milliliter per milligram. Gently insert it into the back of the syringe and begin to slowly tighten it, okay? Very gently until it's firmly in place. Take the atomizer and attach it to the front of the syringe and gently turn until it's locked in place. Be careful not to turn it too hard, it will break. You now have the syringe ready with the naloxone and the atomizer. Go back to the person, again, tilt their head back, okay? Gently place the atomizer into the nostril on one side, holding one side of the nose. Then gently inject 1 milligram or 1 milliliter of naloxone, Narcan, into the nostril. You can see you've gone 1 milliliter. It's on the side of the syringe. After you have inserted half the syringe, 1 milliliter of the naloxone, into one nostril, go to the other nostril, and again, gently place it in, head back, and push, such as this, the rest of the Narcan into that nose. And you can see the Narcan spray coming out of the atomizer, okay? This medication is now absorbed into the bloodstream. Traveling to the brain, it will now move the opioid drug or medication off the receptor site and then to trigger the person to breathe again. Continue to monitor the person for breathing. Some people, based on the amount of opioids they've taken, will begin to respond within a minute or two. Some people may respond in a very dramatic, agitated manner. If they do, you need to orient the person to what has happened, okay? And be aware that the person could become very agitated. Other persons, depending again on how much opioids they've taken, may not wake up. The goal of Narcan administration is not to necessarily wake the person up. The goal is to get the person to be able to breathe on their own. If after giving the Narcan, okay, the person is still not breathing adequately, give rescue breaths. If after 3 minutes the person is still not breathing adequately, you can administer additional doses of Narcan with another syringe and another vial.